Hello, everyone. This is Leilani Cawthon, CEO, publisher, and author at the Learning Council Media and Research Company. Also, I am a Grandmaster Edu Jedi from the Edu Jedi Leadership Society, which is no small thing because we have plastic lightsabers and we will take you down. But I really want to make sure you're all introduced to the idea that today we're going to talk about supporting learning continuity in a time of uncertainty. This is a critical conversation. We're really at a moment where people are starting to say, and a lot of the districts and schools that we talked to in our big national research survey showed this, they're at the point of end of school year exhaustion, if you know what I mean, right? They're already there. They were there maybe a month ago. So it's not a time where we can just sort of take our foot off the gas as the superintendents out there. And I call this the emerging golden age of school and district leadership, because you've entered a war zone of all the things you've got to cover now to be leadership. So for this particular hour, this smart internet seminar, this supporting learning continuity in time of uncertainty, I'm going to turn over the baton to John Baker. He's all geared up with questions to ask all of you from our illustrious sponsor, D2L Desire to Learn. So we have with us Dr. Augustine Tornatore from Liberty Central, Dr. Michael Salvatore from Long Branch Public, hello, and Dr. Joseph Baeta, who's from Norton Public. Turning it over to you, John. I'm going to take myself off camera and just sort of lurk to your wonderful conversation. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much, John.
Thanks, Leilani. It's a great to be on a call again with you to discuss these really timely and important conversation in terms of how we navigate the uncertainty. And you used a wartime analogy. I tend to refer to it as navigating the fog. So I think we can probably connect the dots there pretty easily. So I actually wanted just to share a few quick words in terms of just a little bit about D2L and set some context. I know I've got Lauren here, by the way, with me, and she's going to share just literally there's just 2 slides. And then we're going to get into a proper introduction for the folks that are on the call joining us with the panel. And we're going to have a really meaningful conversation, I think, today. And just listening to the warm-up call here, I think we're going to have a really dynamic conversation, not only on the future of learning. I think we could probably also talk a little bit about the future of work as well too, just from the conversations we've been having already, all of which are good ground for us to cover. And well, folks, just to share a few key words around D2L. I started the company. I'm the founder. I started the company about 20 years ago as a third-year university student, and I was wrestling with a big question that was in my head, which was, what's the most important problem that I could solve that would have the biggest impact on the world? And I couldn't think of anything bigger than transforming the way the world learns. Now, both my parents are educators. My grandfather was a 42-year educator. My family certainly has got a long history in terms of supporting education across all levels, really. Although I didn't stitch that together until a little bit later, I kind of fell into the family business almost in terms of building technology to really support educators and having a bigger impact on students. Because when you think about it, there's really nothing more impactful because education has this ripple effect. It ripples from one generation to the next. It ripples through our family members. It ripples throughout our communities. And it helps us solve the underlying key challenges that we're all facing. And we're certainly facing a lot of key challenges now, and learning is central to that conversation. I would be remiss to say that we're not in an unusual circumstance with the pandemic swirling around us. They say there are decades that go by where nothing happens, and then there are years where decades happen. Well, I certainly feel like this is one of those years where we've seen a lot of change in a hurry. And we're going to discuss that here in a little bit in terms of what people have been navigating already. And then also trying to build, in my mind, a shared vision for what the future should hold. Maybe we'll chip away at some of that vision conversation today in terms of how we can navigate these waters and get to a better spot on the other side. I think we've been pulled forward into the future. I certainly see that when I look at the statistics in terms of utilization of our learning platform. We work with, all the major virtual schools across North America, most of the major virtual schools, I should say. and millions of students that use us for blended learning in the traditional classroom that have also pivoted in many cases to fully online through parts of the year here. But we're also seeing a big challenge when you look globally with about 1.1 billion school kids still impacted by this pandemic in one way or another. In some countries where we're doing work, school kids have not actually been back to school at all since April, which think about the challenges that's going to present either online or face-to-face. And, you know, I think while we're here speaking with folks from New Jersey and New York and other areas, you know, we've got to remember we're in a bit of a privileged position too in terms of the impact, but it's also on our shoulders really to think about the hard problems that this pandemic has presented and trying to chip away at figuring out how do we solve these big challenges. Not to put that on the entire panel saying we're going to solve all the world's problems here today, but we hope that through the questions that we're going to ask, as well as the questions that hopefully you as participants and attendees ask, we can have a really good conversation on these topics. And then one last thing about me before we move in, and maybe we can go one more slide ahead, is, you know, we've been doing a lot of work on thought leadership in this space. So if you want to check out some of the thought leadership, it's not marketing resources, it's really genuine future of work thought leadership white papers, policy briefs on how to navigate these situations. Definitely check out the links that are below. They're good. They're a good read. And I personally have been involved in sort of a national strategy to figure out how to restart the economy post this pandemic, and happy to talk about the future there as well, because I think it lines up with a critical investment that's needed in education to get millions of people back on their feet with new jobs, new careers. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to maybe introduce the panel. And instead of a long bio, folks, like what I'm hoping is that we can do a fun fact about each of you. It could be a hobby, a nickname, it doesn't really matter. I think just to give you a quick introduction for yourself in terms of where you come from, what you're doing, and also a fun fact. So maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Baeta.
Good afternoon to you all. Good to see colleagues from other parts of the country. I'm in Norton, Massachusetts, just south of Patriots Place and home of the 6-time world champions. I might as well sneak that in there because it could be a while before I say it again, based on what I'm seeing. Norton's about 2,500 students, 5 school buildings, community of about 19,000 people, semi-affluent, so on and so forth. Fun fact, I was actually, I remind myself all the time that I was an English language learner. I was born in Portugal, came to this country when I was 5, and tried to always remember my ELL population of students because I went through some of the issues that they went through as well.
Well, that's a great fun fact, and certainly an opportunity to build a bond and a connection with students. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Salvatore, maybe we'll go to you next.
Great. Good afternoon. Happy to be here today with my colleagues from the Northeast. I was trying to look in the background to see if you had any snow back there. I can't even turn right now. It's like a blizzard outside of my window here in New Jersey. So fun fact, I've actually been in this district for almost 24 years. Started as a volunteer in the district, 0 pay, and then had the greatest job of substitute teacher. Worked through teacher, principal, assistant superintendent, and superintendent for the past 10 years. So this is certainly a home to me here. I'm very excited to be here to talk about some of the challenges and maybe opportunities that come from COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll go to Dr. Is it Tornatore?
Tornatore.
Yeah. What's that?
Tornatore.
Yeah. Okay. Tornatore. Got it.
There you go. So thank you for having me. And just to share with you, I'm the superintendent of Liberty Central School District, which is about 2 hours north of Manhattan. I don't know if you can see behind me, but we do have snow and mountains. We're not quite, although we're preparing for what Dr. Salvatore is dealing with in New Jersey. It's on its way over. I will share that I do call Liberty Manhattan in the Mountains. It's a very cosmopolitan, extremely diverse community where everybody really comes together, works, supports one another. And that's what impressed me with this community and why I had been interested in coming to work at Liberty. I'm now in my 4th year in the district. It's just a wonderful place, hardworking people. I have amazing teachers, amazing administrative team. I'm very fortunate. And to share a fun fact, I'm going to give 2 because one actually has to do with Portugal. It is actually my favorite country in Europe that I visited. Even though I am Italian American, I have to say the Portuguese were the nicest people that I've met in all of Europe. Just wonderful people, great food, great wine. The other fun fact is I do love to bird watch, and because the district is sort of like in a valley around the mountains, I constantly get eagles and hawks and other beautiful massive birds that literally fly right behind me in my office. So it's so refreshing and exciting to see that, and to see the deer and all the other the natural beauty that exists in Sullivan County. So those are my fun facts.
Yeah. Well, my dad's a biology teacher, so I can see his classes being outside almost the entire time if that was the if that was his setting.
Absolutely.
And my brother, by the way, honeymooned in Portugal, so there's a connection there for at least for the 2 of you. Yeah. So folks, maybe just to help set the context, it's been a challenging year. It's not easy to navigate in the best of times, let alone through these challenges that we're going through. It'd be great just to give a quick round in terms of the panel, just an understanding of some of the challenges you've had to navigate, how you've actually navigated them. I know that seems like a broad question, but I'd really like to understand the setting in terms of local challenges for the different districts. Why don't we start with you, Dr. Baeta?
So, I think the dialogue for us around here has really been around the social emotional issues with students and also staff. I am concerned about the academics as the superintendent. I can never say that you aren't when you're doing this so differently, but I'm more concerned about the mental health well-being of my students and my staff. So in the last 2 weeks, we've tried to shift the dialogue around how to de-stress not only students but staff, and also beginning to make a commitment to each other that this may actually be an opportunity, one that actually continues to, for lack of a better phrase, protects jobs, and which is an area that people really worry about, but also enhances those jobs and changes some of the things that we do. And I think the last part is getting the continuing buy-in from the community of parents who only know certain things in a certain way versus what we're trying to do. We're in a hybrid model, about to go remote because of the increase in COVID situations in our school, most of it around quarantining. I have a lot of spouses whose spouses are first responders. And so, I've got the reading teacher just went down. I got the PE teacher just went down. I got the physics teacher just went down. I got 5 custodians that just went down, and it goes on. So closure is not because we have a lot of COVID in the building. We've had a total of 12 cases. So it's pretty low amount. It's the connections to that. And then people feeling comfortable with remote. I'll end here by saying that I think in March, April, we did what I would call a crisis perspective of education. We just tried to shift without really knowing what we were doing. Many of us were doing one-to-one already, but this was different, to now being more about how do we make this an opportunity. So we came back with all kinds of pre-approved plans. The state decided that, because that's what they do, decided to get more involved in what they call seat time. I come from the perspective of we really think our model is one of the best around, and I can tell you based on my parent surveys, they will tell you that it's one of the better models around, the hybrid that we have, and even our remote. But now I have to have 35, if I'm full remote, I have to have 40 hours of live screen time with kids. Makes no connections to me whatsoever. So battling that, and I've just decided that, and I've taken some heat, but I think you have to at some times. I've decided to join my teachers and say that they're right and that the state is wrong. And that we should be looking at the quality of what we're doing and not the quantity, because there's so many other things going on in our home lives with our teachers, administrators, our families, that the quantity to me is not what's important. It's the quality of what we're asking students to do that's more important.
Well, we could spend a lot of time on that one, and maybe we can touch on it with the other folks on the panel. But and sorry for the dog in the background here, folks. Part of the challenges of not actually being in the office here today. So when you think about that key challenge there, I don't know how you solve this with live. A mastery-based model, I'm a big fan of, because not all students are coming in from the same place, and to be able to demonstrate mastery of the different expectations that are on these students, I think that's the key. Some may be able to do it quickly, some may have to take extra time. And during these pandemics, it's really hard for, I can't imagine every student has a device in their hands. And if you're in a family, like sharing a device, it's very hard to have everyone live at the same time. There's all kinds of challenges there. So maybe we could touch on that, because I think that's one thing that we need to help the policymakers really truly understand the impact of some of those decisions. It may seem wise at the time, but it might negatively impact the educational experience.
I also think we're just in this shifting environment. And I love the way Joe described it, because we're doing the same stuff here. Another one went down. Like, yeah. It's like a war zone. I mean, people are going down every day, and then they've got these restrictions on when people can go back. I mean, we're all dealing with the same stuff. I mean, whether it's Massachusetts, New York, Jersey, our friends on the West Coast, the same exact scenarios. When I think I do something creative, I just run it by one of my colleagues and I go, yeah, we did that a month ago. Because that's the environment we're in. We're constantly trying to do something different. And I read a quote, and I thought it was interesting, because this goes right along with what we're talking about. And it says, ultimately your leadership's going to be judged on how well you manage the mental and behavioral health component, not by how well you manage the concepts and skills taught in your scope and sequence. And I think about that because we started talking about how teachers and students need attention in this area. And we can't give up on that. I mean, we can have all the metrics we want in real time with the propensity for student learning and growth models. But the reality is we've got to treat people like humans first. And then when we address their humanity in terms of the way they're feeling, their fears, and then we can begin to work on other things. I mean, I've seen a real transitional mindset, and I bet you my colleagues can agree to this. If we came off the summer and we had this cavalier mindset out in Jersey here, I'm right on the coast. I'm like 2 blocks away from the ocean. And it was like, all right, summer felt good. And yeah, I could wear a mask, but I don't know if I need to. I'll wear it at work if I have to. Now this transitional mindset to where we're at now is completely different. The anti-maskers are throwing their masks on. They're fearful. They're pulling their kids out to be in remote when they didn't even believe this was real. So we are seeing this transitional mindset, and we've got to manage that too, because people who weren't fearful are suddenly starting to see and know and feel the effects of this virus, not just on a school environment, but in our community. So this is the environment we're managing. And I guess the best word to describe is you better be patient and flexible. That's for sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I definitely agree with my colleagues. Certainly, it seems like every single day there is a new shift or a new challenge that presents itself, and that we have to think things through and the impact of those decisions. And I really go back to how we set up our planning. And I feel that the best way to do that is to be completely 100% transparent with the community. So as we face each situation, and as we made the decision to go into a hybrid model on the secondary level and on the elementary level, we were fortunate enough to put the classes into their pods, so they are more isolated from one another. So when we do have a situation where somebody does test positive, and of course it's always coming from outside of the district. I mean, we've been very fortunate that none of the cases stemmed from in district, which is saying that we're doing things right between everybody wearing the masks, being more than 6 feet apart, We completely worked on our ventilation systems to ensure that we have the fresh air circulating. So, we did all the things based upon the CDC guidelines, but at the end of the day, you have to have that transparency with your staff, with the parents, with the community, so that they do trust your leadership. And we also had a tremendous amount of surveys, in addition to what in New York, Governor Cuomo had said there were certain parameters that the superintendents had to go through when submitting our plans, and we had to submit 3 options. But with that, I made sure that I wanted to get the parents' input, and as it turned out, we've been able to meet the needs of all the parents who wanted fully remote because they were concerned, and then the parents who wanted their children in school. And unfortunately, we just didn't have the space to have 5 days a week instruction on the secondary level, so we were in the hybrid model. But it's all about the transparency. At the end of the day, it's all about, like my colleagues are saying as well, about being compassionate, being understanding. I certainly have noticed that not just at work, but everywhere in life, everything's moving a lot slower right now, because as Americans, we are jumping through, and as the world is jumping through more hoops to be able to get things accomplished. And so, whether somebody's working remotely or at work and they have to go through wearing the mask or having these parameters and making sure that when you see somebody in the hallway, you try to stay far enough apart from them. And, there are all these things that we're thinking about, and just having that humanistic approach to it and understanding and being flexible. I think flexibility is probably the most, that and the transparency are really the most important keys to success as we navigate through this.
Well, I think each of the 3 of you are really highlighting a lot of the characteristics or values that you're holding dear as you're making these tough decisions, right? The transparency, focus on well-being and social, emotional, the human aspect, making sure you're building understanding. And I really like the feedback loops that you're establishing as well with the community, with the parents, with the students. So it's great leadership, all of you. So, pivoting to like a couple of other questions that I've got is around, access. So it sounds like if I'm hearing you right, I think what many of you are trying to do is provide access through multiple different ways or modes, if you will, of learning. Are there other things that you're doing to help make sure that each student across the district is able to learn, to get that continuity of learning, if you will?
So if I may, I'll share out that we doubled our bandwidth because we knew that there was going to be so much more usage, and we didn't want students and parents and teachers to be frustrated that they were dealing with the circle in waiting for either items to download or to be able to have that connectivity. And we purchased high-tech cameras that we tested out in the classrooms, and we made sure that they were clear, that the microphones were clear as well. And we additionally put in wireless hotspots around the district. We gave out hotspots, if you will, to families who are in need. We are a high needs district, so not all of our families have the technology and the access. So we have the Chromebooks for all of our students. We are ensuring that they have the access to technology so that everybody is on the same playing field, because it's so important that students, regardless of their socioeconomic status, that they have access to a very solid and supportive educational system.
John, I think one of the things that's really interesting to piggyback is a number of us in my area have been arguing what I call the zip code battle, which is really, some school districts spending $20,000 per student, some school districts at barely 10. And then you see the socioeconomics that my colleague just spoke about and that we're all dealing with free and reduced lunch. At one point, 16% unemployment during the height of COVID for us here back in May, April, and June. That number is now closer to 8, but still, what does that mean? And trying to feed people, right? So we went to the humanistic perspective of, a great mentor of mine when I was starting up as an administrator who said, don't forget you're in the people business. And I think sometimes we forget that, because we have to deal with unions and contracts and the back and forth that happens. And the shift for us continues to be one of, many of us may have already communicated to our finance committees and to our communities the request for all of this technology. So it's kind of nice to go by I told you so. It wasn't a waste of money. I wasn't planning for a pandemic, but when people say to me, oh, we're starting out teaching 21st century skills, I remind them that we're about to enter 2021. We're 21 years behind already, right? So for me, the dynamic is, let's stop arguing about needing the Chromebooks and needing the cameras and needing the blah, 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 and the bandwidth and all of that, and say that that's a minimum standard going forward, period. Now we can talk about what is the best instructional practices that go with being in, having the camera in the classroom or being on Zoom or any of that. The new norm is that for years in public education in Massachusetts, we've said to anybody who wanted to homeschool them, fill out this application, good luck. We're about to change that dynamic. That dynamic is now, we're probably going to continue in Massachusetts to offer remote learning in the public setting. I'm probably going to have to create a brand new contract, probably going to have to create a brand new faculty. That's going to be the future. I have 348 kids on remote learning right now, full remote parent choice. We call it the Digital Learning Academy. And I'm telling you right now, half of those people are not coming back in September. So do I lose them to someone else, or do I pivot and say, I'm in this business now as a public institution? And that's a dynamic conversation in the eyes of some.
Oh, I can't wait to dive into that. I think that ties into the future conversation here. But maybe, Mike, we can have you help round out the access question. And then I do want to get into both the pedagogy as well as that future conversation.
Sure. So I didn't share it earlier, but this district is identified as an urban district, even though we are right on the coastline. We have about 6,000 students and 85% are free reduced lunch. Most speak a different language in the household. So Joe, you'll be happy to know that the diversity here is Portuguese speaking, 20% from Portugal. Okay, the other 30% is from Brazil. And then I have a large Latino population from Central and South America.
Well, Mike, just to let you know, I've been there. I know exactly where you are.
Oh, you have? You've been here. Well, if you from Portugal, you probably have been here because it's like a home for many Portuguese families. So in our community, though, access was just a grind from the beginning. We actually spent probably $500,000 getting internet access into the homes of kids. And that was with MiFi devices that would light up 4 or 5 devices in a house. And we're paying a monthly fee. Thankfully, New Jersey had a digital divide grant that we applied for, so that will cover it. And some of those CARES Act funding are really important right now. And they're helping us get through a time when I don't know where we're going to be next year at this time. But making sure kids had access. And then there's a whole orientation of teaching parents on how to set up a safe, comfortable space for learning in a house when maybe their house is a room. Mm-hmm. And maybe in that room, they eat, they play, they sleep. So working with families so that they can set up these small little learning centers in their one-room apartment, that was a challenge. What we recently learned is that many families are very resourceful. So I had a teacher who was teaching class, and she heard a teacher on the first floor talking while she was teaching. And she said to one of the kids who she was teaching remotely, said, "Do I hear Mr. McLaughlin?" And the kid said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, how do I hear him?" And they took their Chromebook and they spun around the room. And what the teacher said she saw, and I've heard countless stories of this, that in somebody's basement, they set up almost like a bar around there with laptops like it was a computer lab. All the school laptops that we issued, the Chromebooks, and there were 15 to 20 kids in there with 2 adults. And most of the kids had headphones on, but some didn't. And they saw, wow, look at this learning environment. So when we couldn't get them in initially, parents made it happen. They had to go to work. A day off was a day without pay. So, I mean, we were really working to make sure they had access, they had devices they need, because aside from all the other things they were dealing with, I didn't want to put that extra struggle on them that they couldn't even be connected to their teacher. But this is the gap now that we're seeing is it's actually goes by grade spans. You know, what we've noticed that some of our high school kids, they prefer to roll out of bed and connect if they can, because they don't want to wake up earlier in the morning. They like to watch YouTube videos on 2 times and 4 times speed so they can get through the lesson quicker, you know. But the elementary kids, without the staff facilitating the dialogue and that social environment, it's a real challenge. And I think probably as we pivot and talk about learning loss or potentially a whole restructure of pacing for elementary and maybe a whole restructuring of scope and sequence, and that's what I think is in the future. I don't think it's to continue. We're seeing too many gaps right now, particularly with our kids who don't have a lot of resources.
Well, all right. So I'm itching to get towards that, as you can tell, like the future. And by the way, those are great efforts across the board in terms of really breaking down some pretty significant barriers to access. So congrats. You're doing a really good job in very trying times. So, we use a model around sort of technology maturity. So, in our case, we think about technology adoption in sort of waves. So first wave is digitization, which is largely what we're talking about here in terms of making sure folks have like the basic access, right? And you cobble together dozens of different solutions to figure out how to make it work. And then the next wave is really around the optimization. So there you tend to start to do things like, in our case, automatically grading assignments or quizzes, or nudging a student when they're falling behind, or just anything to make it easier for the teacher, for the student. And then you get into real transformation. So, that could mean like mastery-based models of learning, but basically it's not, to your point earlier, I think, Joe, and all of you really, it's not about technology for technology's sake. It's about humanizing the educational experience. So, making it easier for one-on-one feedback, making it easier to build engagement. All of those things are really what we're trying to get to in terms of those transformations. So I'd like to understand, and by the way, when we think about the education system, a lot of folks talk about resilience now. I don't know if that's a buzzword that's caught around, but resilience, if you actually look at the etymology, the Latin root, it talks about rebound or recoil. And my hope is, at least the person that also has a dad that's a biologist, as I mentioned earlier, thinks about how do we bounce forward? How do we actually look at this as a disruption that actually helps us flourish in different ways, and lets new models take root versus us taking a step back? And so I'm really curious in terms of how we actually build that shared narrative on that future, which hopefully helps shape policymakers and leaders in guiding them on a better path than what we're hearing so far, right? So, to your point earlier, Joe, on, it's not about 30 hours of live lecture. I don't know of any thought leader that's thinking that's the way that we need to go. So what is it? What is the pedagogy that we really should be supporting to support the wide variety of experiences that these students are all going through right now? Who wants to start?
I guess
Go ahead.
It's really a balance of synchronous and asynchronous learning if there's going to be remote teaching. And it's also about, because we use Google, so we are working with our teachers and providing professional development so that they could get into the breakout rooms and students, again, can engage with one another. So if they can't do it always in person, so that students could work together, because all the research shows that students perform better when they are teaching the material to one another. So always trying to make things student-centered rather than teacher-centered. I always say to my teachers, if you are exhausted at the end of the day, that's not good. The kids need to be exhausted at the end of the day. You are the facilitator. And so we've been supporting them with the tremendous amount of professional development and understanding as we go through the observation process, and always providing tips and tools, if you will, and we're always trying to get information out there. But to me, it goes beyond that. It really needs to start in the college programs And it's important that the colleges and universities do what they can, especially prior to the student teaching process, of really showcasing all the various types of learning to be able to tap into different opportunities for students, if you will. And certainly with research, we also know too that it is more challenging for remote learning for the younger students. And as they get older, they certainly, becomes easier for them. Juniors and seniors always perform the best with online learning. My dissertation actually is all about online learning, so I love talking about it. And I feel that a barrier, if you will, that we felt in New York was that wasn't really allowed as much. And it takes a lot of coaxing, if you will, a lot of conversation, and a lot of really just showing that research, how that even though we are in this pandemic, the silver lining is we are opening up more doors and more avenues for our students. And certainly I completely agree with my colleagues about the future, and that we, because I've already been saying to myself, once I'm already beginning the process of post-pandemic plan, and really taking a look at how we can move ahead where we will have traditional brick and mortar instruction, but how we could also support the remote instruction as well. And what is that going to look like? And certainly we have to have conversations with our teachers unions and work collaboratively so that we come to a place where their input is appreciated and they are respected in the process, but where we continue to move our students to a point where we are providing the tools so that they are successful, not just in the 21st century, because again, we are 21 years, like Joe said, we are 21 years into the 21st century. But we have to plan so these students are successful for jobs that don't even exist yet. Things are moving at a much faster rate. And as Americans, we always have to look at things as Americans. How can we compete against our other colleague nations, if you will? How can we stay at the forefront economically? How can we stay at the forefront with respect from the world? And a lot of that stems from education and what we do in public education, and how our colleagues in the various political levels, again, local, state, and federal, how they support us to make that happen. I know people tend to say, oh, we're always hearing how school districts need more money, but certainly, as we all experienced, the tremendous amount of PPE that we had to purchase, the reconfigurations of cafeterias, classrooms, and everything that we had to do, the amount of cleaning equipment that we had to purchase to sanitize the buildings daily, that takes a chunk out of our budget, but yet we don't want to have that impact programming. So we've been extremely fiscally conservative, of course, like Mike was sharing about, thank goodness there's the CARES Act, and there are some levels of support, but we as educational leaders and instructional leaders, we need more of that support from the federal and the state level, and in understanding that as we are in this pandemic, that we do have this silver lining, that again, we can make significant positive change for students and bring them more opportunities. We just need to continue the conversation. We need to involve everybody in that conversation. And again, that transparency as we move along this journey, because at the end of the day, as long as I am providing as much professional development as I can to my teachers so that they can be successful, then in turn, they're going to provide more opportunities for our students. And that's, as superintendents, what we always want. We want to see our students be successful. We want to see them not only graduate high school, but be prepared for the real world and for the job market, and to be successful in careers. So these are all things that go into the mix with that.
One of the things that I really believe is a positive, if you will, within the methodology and instruction that's taking place today, is that some of my best teachers, what I would call my top 10, 15% of my teachers, that could work anywhere with any type of student, at any time, right? And we all have a bunch of those that work for us. What they've been able to do is the old, I'm old enough to remember the old talk of power standards, right? Because for decades we've been trying to teach 36 standards in ELA and 65 in math and 120 in this, and we can't even agree on social studies because is it Eurocentric or not and all this other stuff. And so I was in China a year ago this past October, believe it or not, with a group of superintendents. And they said something to us as a group that I thought was really interesting. They said, we've decided to take what you did well for 50 years and throughout and make it our priority. And their priority was, in kindergarten, it's about play. It's about play. And if you look at the research, it's pretty clear, right? So now we're having discussions around what are the power standards? What does play look like? What's recreation look like for all students? We've been talking about health and wellness for decades, and yet every single time we have to cut something, we cut physical education, music, and art. So we're the worst enemies to ourselves. So what we've been trying to do in Norton, and I know all of us have nationwide, is we're trying to bring back those core things that if the SEL, if the social emotional behavioral learning of students is solid, test scores are going to be fine. They're going to be fine. Now, if you want to be the #1 school district in the state, then I guess you can do whatever you need to do, reteach. I mean, one of the biggest complaints I have about teaching and learning is sticking a kid in an extra math class in high school. That kid just thinks I'm going to a second math class because somebody doesn't think I'm smart enough to pass the test. That's their emotions. That's where they are. That's their psychology. Unfortunately for us, we've had to create this more time and all that stuff because of the pressures of trying to teach kids. And I think that the other shift that we have to have is to really push, and in Massachusetts, we're really pushing that, especially with the Biden administration coming in, that this idea of one test is the result of success can't happen. And career technical education nationwide did a shift when testing became possible or became a requirement. Nationwide, those CTE high schools literally said to themselves, how do I teach AP classes? How do I teach world language for the first time in decades? That's what we did in Massachusetts. And now they got 75 to 80% of their kids going on to college, most of them 4-year colleges, because hands-on learning, world problem solving, all of that stuff they've been doing for decades while we've shifted to the dynamics of some tests that we have to have every kid pass. So if we can take those 36 standards in reading and literature, and we can make it 8 and fundamentally get into them during 180 days of school, regardless if it's all in front of them or it's part of the technology support and methodology and practice, I think we're going to be successful because that's where our kids are, right? How many of our kids are helping our teachers with technology right now? That's where they are. Screen time is a problem, and I'll stop here by saying that's a concern, but the right screen time can be very successful. I would say having a panel of people talk about the future of education can be a very successful screen time. Listening to the Board of Education vote on giving me seat time is a waste of my time. So to me, it's all about how interactive do you make it with students? How do you excite them about learning? And then you let them go and create. That backwards design model does work. The flip model does work. We're just a little scared of it.
Yeah, Joe and Mike, I'll get to you in a second here because I really wanted to get your point of view to this. Joe, what you're saying resonates with me. If you look at I actually think we should change the definition, the literal definition in the book on what we describe as study. If you look at the definition that we have today, it's about mental effort, careful, attentive. Right. It's using the wrong language. If you look at the original definition that was written hundreds and hundreds of years ago, it's about desire, passion, pursuit. It's a different kind of study. And somehow we've lost something in the translation over the ages, and we really need to, in my mind, where technology can help is it kind of allows you to get through those standards a little faster to allow students to get back to the pursuit of, imagination, creativity, music, arts, dance, whatever it is that you want to pursue, right? So I think you're on to something really important there with that comment. Mike, over to you.
I just want to jump into the screen time talk because I'm always curious when I see it advertised, you know, the impact of screen time. So if I see an article on it, I'll read it. And then it's basically what Joe said. It's what screen time are you experiencing? Is it interactive? Is it engagement? Is it prompting dialogue? You know, screen time that's bad for your brain is the screen time that takes kids away from interacting, takes kids away from socialization. In fact, the right screen time can prompt literacy, can prompt language if it's done correctly. So it's just getting that information out so that people know that. But I do see, in terms of looking toward the future, I would love to see a shift from those big idea tests with all these standards and 2 to 3 questions that mark whether somebody mastered that standard. I mean, I don't even know how it's really reliable, but the psychometricians will tell you it is. But the piece to me is get back to the old research, not just the UBD approach. That's great too, but the formative assessment process. I mean, every platform we're seeing right now has like key features, right? They're all adaptive. They're all differentiated. They're all becoming personalized, you know, and they all can they can be predictive, right? They can predict someone's propensity for learning. We already have the analytics there. We have the platforms there. Maybe if we start using that and meeting kids where they're at. I mean, that's what everybody's saying today. Meet children where they're at. If a 5-year-old walks through the door after COVID, he looks different than a 5-year-old who came back last year and will come back 2 years from now. So we've got to look at leveraging those digital tools. But also, we gotta be loud voices, squeaky wheels in the ears of our legislators. Early on in superintendency, I was like, keep my mouth shut, you know, work with my district, be quiet, and just lead internally. And then I started seeing the value of making sure I had a relationship with my local senator, local assembly, even the executives, the commissioner of education. Those were so critical, and I think our colleagues need to do that. So if you can't find the time to get out and provide an oral testimony to a Senate hearing, you know, look at AASA and other organizations like that. They'll take your written testimony and carry it. And we need to do that because I've seen funds restored. I've seen people question standards and different processes that go up for vote. So I think we just need to be that squeaky wheel, particularly when it comes to big tests, big items, and what their real value is today. And I think we're seeing they don't quite have the value that we anticipated, right?
Mike, I couldn't agree more. I think the more that we can spend educating folks on, you know, the right path forward is critical, which is why this conversation matters so much. Is it helps us all build sort of a shared vocabulary, helps us, you know, share ideas across borders. And because no good idea, you know, good ideas should be heard. and the last thing we want to do is step backwards. You know, and by the way, folks, we're going to go to Q&A with the audience here. So attendees, please, if you've got questions, type them in the chat or into the Q&A, whichever is more comfortable. We're going to get to your questions here in a moment. And I know, Danielle, looks like you've got a question here around repeating the 3 stages of technological maturity. So I spoke to the first step in that journey, if you will, is digitization. So you tend to see in digitization a lot of different point solutions start to emerge, and then you might, you know, implement a learning platform per se. And then the next step is optimization, which is when you start to really take what you're using and just make it a better experience. So instead of having a grade 3 student log into 10 different systems, they log into one and it hooks off into those other systems as, you know, a really basic example. Or it could do things like automatically grade an assignment or quiz just to give teacher more time to spend one-on-one feedback with kids. And then the last stage is really the transformation piece, which we were talking about earlier too, in terms of potentially doing like a mastery-based model. And Mike, you highlighted again there too around, you know, mastery tends to fall underneath the house of personalization or individualization, differentiation. All these language pieces are really important, but they've been historically really hard to do with traditional systems because, you know, well, how do you even assess a student under that model? You know, and I'll give you one example. What we're trying to do this month, actually, we just rolled out a linkage between traditional grade books and a mastery view of the grade book. So when a student I think 10 years from now, we're going to look back at this time and say, boy, I can't believe we used to assess that way. Where today, if you're to grade a student, you add up all their assignments and you simply divide by the total, which is going to look really strange 10 years from now, because, learning's on a curve, right? You start not knowing something and then you start to know it, and then you demonstrate mastery. And we really should be assessing things, and we should actually look at that learning. And you hit on it right away around the formative piece. It's not just about, these big high stakes exams that are supposed to measure and assess. Really, they're benchmark exams, really. And we can do better than that. The technology exists today to do a much better job at all of those elements. I don't know.
Hey,
I don't know. Panelists, do you want to add to that? Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that one of my biggest concerns going forward about what we're learning is that we don't want instructional technology in the way that we're trying to do our remote learning, our hybrid, or whatever happens later on where we're using that one-to-one and better instructional practice in the classroom or at home, or whatever the combination. We don't want the interaction to become, if you will, the new fill-in-the-blank worksheet.
Yeah.
But to Michael's comment, we want to really drive the idea that screen time playing the game for a certain part of time can actually teach you a skill, believe it or not. But the connection to a teacher, an educator, a paraprofessional, a counselor, whatever it may be, administrator, the lunch lady, the lunchroom, the cafeteria, all of those combinations, the interaction is the most important part. And what are you trying to get students to do? Because I always say that, to educate is to motivate, because motivation is the key to probably where all of us on the screen, why we do what we do. We're motivated to be in the roles that we're in and to do more and to do better. Kids are the same way. One of the things I say to people all the time is, do not blame this generation for being a me generation. What I'm seeing from my students is that they are an us generation. They want to do more for each other. They're not as tied into, let me make a lot of money. They're tied in. My graduating kids are all about some way connected to community, from the psychologist position to a position where they want to be a social worker or a classroom teacher. That's where they're going, but they're doing it in a different way as well. And I think that the component of how we use screen time is so important, because we just can't go back to fill in the blanks. That would be a really bad approach.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. And it's not about using the technology. It's about humanizing the educational experience, which I think you're really underscoring. Lisa has got a great question here.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. If I could just
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
That, because it's so important. To me, the end game is project-based learning, and again, those problem-solving skills, where we are not using technology to regurgitate information, but we're seeking that deeper understanding with our students. And in my district, I use 3 frameworks to move the district forward. Of course, I mentioned the PLCs before, but I'm also using the SAMR model, which is created by Dr. Ruben Fuentedora. And it really helps because we've been guiding our teachers on this journey to go from teacher-centered to student-centered, from just sharing information to giving a problem and having the students try to take all of the technology to figure that out. And again, like Joe was saying, that humanization factor, it has to be a part of it, because technology, just with technology alone, is not going to make change. So, we have to put in these parameters and provide, again, the PD and support for our teachers, as well as, that top percent, like Joe was saying, that top 10 to 15% of our teachers, we use them in a way that they are sharing with their colleagues what they're doing. And we have a Pineapple Challenge where they before the pandemic, they were physically visiting each other's rooms. Now they're virtually visiting each other's rooms to get ideas and to elicit more excitement as we're on the journey. So I did have to mention that as well.
Thank you for that ad. Those are all good ideas. And yeah, we didn't really touch on the PD aspect of this, giving teachers the time to be able to change. Boy, we just had them jump right into the challenge, didn't we? Without a lot of support. So it's the real hero, a lot of heroism here on the call today. Yeah. Mike, did you want to add anything to that? Because I do think it leans into what Lisa's asking, which is, all this change is not easy. How do we bring the parents and students and teachers along, shifting their thinking from it's always been this way to, this is a catalyst for change. and here's a better path for us. How do we help them make that transition? Because it's really hard to leave one world and enter a new one overnight.
Well, I think Augustine put it perfectly. He talked about project-based learning because that's basically what we did for every teacher in the country. We threw them into the biggest project that they never anticipated. And good luck with that. It's going to be very hands-on, and you're going to have to figure it out because it's truly a project. And that's what we saw. The result was astounding. We saw the needle moved from a place where it was really stuck for a long time, where we had the speedboat teachers who just raced away with all the tech and did whatever we asked. And then we had that slow moving barge in the middle. And that's a lot of our staff. They were just not comfortable taking the leap. They were forced to do it, and they all became speedboats very quickly. And I'll tell you, they worked on this project, and this project, Joseph's talking about, he's like, hey, we have a good model. I feel the same way about us. Like, we have the best model, let's duke it out for who has the best model, right? But we were forced to create together this big project on how to do this dance of synchronous, asynchronous. So it's pretty amazing, but that piece was a hands-on professional learning experience that I believe will change the course of education, of professional learning from this point forward. If we go back to traditional practices that we've been trying to get out of for a long time, shame on us, shame on the educational leaders to allow that to happen.
Just to piggyback on Mike real quick, I always say to people, when you go to a doctor for advice, you accept the advice or you go for a second opinion. In education, why does everybody else's opinion matter, right? And I know it's very idealistic to say that, but everybody has the right to an opinion of how to. You go with your kid to the pediatric because they have a blah blah blah. You get a blah blah blah, and it's resolved. We have to do the same thing in education. When we talk about best practices and research-based best practices, let's publish the damn book about it already instead of just saying it's a best practice. Get the research, sow the research. It's kind of like. And that's the passion that I have for this field, is that I just think that people need to recognize that we are highly trained. Like any field, we are not perfect. We have really good top of the line educators that are getting better every day, and of course educators that we need to move move them out potentially. But so doesn't every industry. It's just in our industry, everybody's got an opinion about it because it's so public. The one phrase I'll leave you with is this. When we all started COVID back in March, I said to my staff, public education just got very public.
Yeah.
And my point was, you're being watched 24/7. Before you could close the door, administrator might come in, supervisor, but you don't have all the parents in the room with you. Now you do.
Leilani, just before we pass it back to you, I just want to say thank you to the panelists as well. So Joe, Augustine, and Mike, what a great conversation today. I feel like we're just getting warmed up and we're really getting into the heat of the real issues here in terms of paving that path forward. And I hope we build resilient systems in the way that nature does. Like, we let these new ideas flourish. We don't just simply bounce back to the way things were, or even worse, go back to worse models than we had before. So to me, this is where real leadership matters. And I really want to thank you as panelists, as well as you as a convening host, and all the attendees for joining us here on the conversation today. And I hope we continue it online or over email or through other calls in the future. So thank you, everybody. Great conversation.
And happy holidays, everyone.
Oh, yeah, and happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays. Yeah, and on behalf of the Learning Council, I want to thank all of you. I put a link to all the panelists. There was a study the Learning Council took a look at. 120,000 in the UK were studied for screen time. There's a maximum of 4.5 hours. That after that, you start brain mush happening. 2.5 of those hours should be reserved for school only, but you have to differentiate between screen learning that's active versus passive. So you can have unlimited active, right? Like they're essaying or they're playing a learning game or whatever. But passive screen time should not exceed the 2.5 hours. So that's the real guidance. That's the largest study ever done. And you should start citing that to your states and your legislators, because that's the biggest. So there's a link in there, and you can find it on the Learning Council. You just search for screen time, and you'll uncover that article on the Learning Council site. So I want to thank all of you, and John Baker, excellent job leading this crew, and supporting learning continuity in time of uncertainty. Great quotes. We're going to be taking a lot of your quotes for the article after this, because this was awesome. Thank you guys all so much. So with that said, any last words, John Baker?
Oh, thank you. It was a great conversation, and we don't want you to get back into more passive time. So I felt this was highly engaging, at least for me. But please enjoy the rest of your day. And again, thank you for the incredibly hard work that you've been doing to support students through these challenging times. I'm very proud of what you all have done. So thanks for sharing those ideas with us today.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for
Happy
being with
holidays,
us.
all.
Happy
Happy holidays. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.